Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Hello, everybody. So today I will present you a joint work with many persons. Here I cite only a few of them in order of apparition in the talk. And here you have also other persons who are not cited here. For instance, Sever, who is in the room, Michael, and others that I... Here are the outlines of the talk. So first, the talk is mainly about how to solve an hyperbolic system of conservation laws on modern computer made of several parallel architecture. So first, the first point would be to explain how we can recast the Vlasov equation into an hyperbolic system of conservation laws. Then I will consider a very simple conservation law solver and explain what we have to do to make it efficient on a hybrid computer. And because this simple conservation law solver is, as I said, very simple, it has some limitation. For instance, if you want to study more complex geometries, and then I will give you some insight, some hints of how to program the discontinuous Galerkin method. The discontinuous Galerkin method is a more general method for complex geometries. So the first point, that just to make the talk more, to recast it into the SEMRAX subject, I will explain how we can put the XV Vlasov equation, which is written in the X space and V space, into an X-only hyperbolic system of conservation laws. So this is very simple. For explaining how we do this, I consider the one-dimensional Vlasov-Poisson model. So this is the Vlasov equation where the distribution functions f depends on x, v, and t. E is the electric field that depends on the space variable x and time t. And f is solution of the transport Vlasov equation written here. And the electric field is a solution of the Poisson equation written here. And for simplicity, I consider, as I repeat, the one-dimensional case with a periodic boundary condition in space. So we are on an interval 0, L. I suppose that we have the mean value of the distribution function that is fixed. And I also suppose that the mean value of the electric field is fixed. For simplicity, I will consider a velocity in an infinite space here. So this equation is probably the simplest model for plasma flows. And I will consider now a finite number of independent functions that depend only on the velocity. So phi k of v for k between 1 and p. And I expand, I take an approximation of f, which is an expansion of f on this basis. So you replace the function f that depends on space, velocity, and time by a set, a vector of function that depends only on x and t. And because I'm lazy, I don't want to write the sums. I suppose that we have a sum on repeated indices here. J is repeated. So the unknown is replaced by the scalar unknown is replaced by a vector of unknown. So this is a classical idea that has been used by many authors with various basis functions. And if you put this into the Vlasov equation, if you multiply by a test function in the same vector space phi I, if you integrate with respect to v, in the end you obtain the following equation. where W, I repeat, is a vector of the coefficient on the basis. And you have matrices in this formula here. So M is a mass matrix, A is this matrix, and B, that depends on E, is given by this formula. And it is very simple to see that M is a symmetric positive matrix, A is symmetric, and then from a standard hyperbolic theory, you can prove that the matrix M minus the inverse of M times A has the real eigenvalues. So in the end, you have an hyperbolic system. This is called a hyperbolic system of conservation laws here, that you can put in a more general form. dt of W plus dx of the flux f of W plus source terms equals 0. So here, the flux f of W is a linear flux. It's given by this formula, and the source is given by this formula. So you see that it is possible to take the Vlasov equation and transform it very simply into an hyperbolic system of conservation law. And I have to say that this approach can be extended to more complex transport models, such as gyrokinetic models. You can also do it in higher dimensions, and so on. And of course, the hyperbolic system theory is also very useful in many other areas of physics. For instance, you have the MHD equations, Maxwell equations, fluids equation can be put into this form. So I consider now the general case. W depends on the space variables, now in a higher dimension space. Here you have the system of conservation law. And we introduce the flux in the direction n. So n is a space vector. So it's f of W n. It's a scalar product of the flux times the direction vector. And this system, it is very important that this system satisfies the following property, which is the hyperbolicity property, which says that the eigenvalues of the Jacobian matrix of the flux with respect to W has to be real. If this condition is not satisfied, it is we can show that the system is not stable, so it is not well posed. So this is a minimal condition if you want to be able to solve this problem. Okay, so now I am in this context, and I will now see how it is possible to numerically solve such a system. So I will not give all the detail because I want to concentrate on programmation on modern computers. So for beginning, I will take a very simple scheme on a very simple geometry, and I will compare several ways of programming this solver. So we consider a system of conservation laws, and for simplicity, I will take only a two-dimensional system here. So the flux has two components, Fx and Fy. And you can think that it is a Maxwell equation, fluids equation, magneto-hydrodynamic, or the reduced Vlasov equation that I presented just before. A very simple way to solve this system is to solve successively two one-dimensional systems by the strength splitting approach. So we consider an approximation of W on a grid in space. So W of I, J, N is an approximation of W at point I delta X, J delta Y, N delta T. And we will solve first these two terms, the X derivative, by this scheme. So this is a very simple finite volume scheme or finite difference scheme. It's the same here in this case. So first you compute one time step of a finite volume scheme in the X direction. So you get a W star. And then you take the W star and you compute a one time step of the same scheme in the Y direction. Here, you have to introduce a numerical object, which is called the numerical flux. So the numerical flux at, maybe I will do a little drawing here to set the notation. So you have a grid. I set it only in one dimension because it's the same in the two directions. So you have here cell I. And here you have point x, y plus 1/2. Here it's x, y minus 1/2. And because you have to compute flux differences at the boundaries of the cells, you have to introduce a numerical flux here that depends on what is in cell I and what is in cell I plus 1. So this is cell I plus 1 here. And because you have discontinuous approximation of the conserved quantities, you need to introduce something that depends on the two sides at the boundary of the cells. So this is a numerical flux. I don't want to explain how we construct the numerical flux, but you guess that if you do not make a good choice of numerical flux, you will not have a good scheme. But I don't want to explain this here. Just remember that in the numerical flux, you have to compute sometimes very complicated expression of what happens on the two sides at the cell boundaries. So this general formulation is very simple because you have to only to solve in one direction and then in the other. And now we program such a scheme on a rather large grid because we will consider a grid greater than this size. And we compare several implementations of the same algorithm. So first, a naive C implementation without optimization on a standard CPU with a single core. Then we take the same program, but we perform a very simple optimization, which is simply to activate the compilator optimization. So this will be the second comparison. Then we can take the same program, and then we try to be a little bit more clever, and we add additional optimization. I will explain it later, which is to have a better access to memory in the program. And this optimization is called tiling. So this is a way to optimize what is called the data locality. And then we take the same program and we add some OpenMP parallelization directive on a 16-core CPU. And then here is what we obtain. So with the naive code, so well, I said it is naive, but it is at least correct. So it has to be written carefully anyway. But this is what we do when we program a numerical algorithm to test if it works. So what you get, so this is a reference, so the speedup is equal to 1. And if you compute, if you want to end the computation, you have to wait 1 month. Now you take the same code with compiler optimization. Then you have a speedup of 5. So it is already very interesting. And if you take the same naive code plus compiler optimization plus the tiling for optimizing data locality, then you have an additional speedup which is 8. And if you add the OpenMP directive in order to compute on all the cores of the CPU, then you get this speedup. So you have to compare with the naive code. So this is what you can gain between programs that you have written in 5 minutes for testing a method and simple optimization, because going to this point is not very complicated. So this gives you the order of magnitude of what you can gain very easily, finally. So if you write an algorithm and it's very long, it's not difficult to accelerate it by a factor of 100. Then we want to go further. So for this, we have to use an accelerator. So for instance, a graphic card or GPU. And for this, classical graphic cards are made of thousands of processors today, so it's not very expensive. For a few hundreds of euros, you can have a very powerful computer. The problem is that you have to program it, and it is not very simple. So recently, a new, so it's not a language, but it's rather a framework. So it's a model of parallel accelerator, which is called OpenCL. So it's a software environment for programming such hardware. So in the OpenCL model, an accelerator device, so it can be a GPU or a CPU or any kind of multi-core processor, is made of memory. So you have typically a few gigabytes of memory. You have what are called compute units. So typically you have a few tens of compute units. And what is interesting is that in each compute unit, you have several processors that are called, in the OpenCL model, processing elements. And in a compute unit, all the processing elements of the compute unit have access to what is called local memory in OpenCL, and actually it is cache memory. It is a very fast access memory that is shared by all the processing elements in a compute unit. So when you write a program, typically it's a C program. It's very, it looks like a C program. The point is that the same C program can be executed on all the processing elements at the same time with a few rules that are listed here. So the first rule is that all the processing elements have access to the global memory. So this is what makes OpenCL very interesting, is that you can access to the memory of the GPU as you want. You can read and write everywhere with all the processors. But if you want to be efficient, if you want to be fast, it's better to use the cache memory, but the processing element have only access to the cache memory of their compute unit. And then you have the difficulty, which is written here, it's written here, is that if two processing elements write at the same location at the same time, you will have only one successful write. And finally, for performance, the access to the global memory is slow, while the access to the local memory is fast. Alors, here, I have written generally because you have some architectures, such as a recent Intel Xeon Phi, for which this constraint is no more true. You can have a fast access to the global memory because the cache memory is managed by the Xeon Phi. Okay. So here you have a picture to explain. It's very simple. So you have here a GPU with two compute units, the first one and the second one. In each compute unit, you have two processors, and each processor can access the local memory of its compute unit and the global memory of the GPU. And the GPU, the accelerator, is plugged into a host, which can be your computer or supercomputer. So if you want to program GPU, so you have OpenCL, which means Open Computing Language. It exists since 2009. And what is interesting is that the specification of this language is managed by the Khronos group, which is also in charge of OpenGL. And all the main manufacturers of CPU, GPU, and accelerators, such as NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, and so on, are participating to this Khronos group. So you have some abstraction for the hardware. So with OpenCL, you can suppose that you have as many compute units as you need. So they are called work groups. And the processing elements are called work items. And when you write a kernel, the threads are sent to the GPU thanks to a mechanism of command queue. So it is managed by the implementation of OpenCL. So you don't have to specify on which compute unit and which actual processor your kernel will run. Everything is managed by OpenCL. And even more, OpenCL also manages event and a task graph, which means that you can also describe to OpenCL the dependency between your kernel. So for instance, if a kernel has to wait for the end of another kernel before starting, this is managed by the driver directly. You don't have to manage yourself your task graph. And a very important point for me is that the same program that you have written can be executed on multi-core CPU or GPU without changing anything. So it's very interesting because you can accelerate your program even if you don't have a GPU. And the driver exists today for almost all hardware that you can imagine. So AMD CPU and GPU, Intel CPU and GPU, the Xeon Phi, Mike, you have ARM processor aussi, IBM PowerShed, and so on. And even more, maybe you know StarPU. So StarPU is a software environment for accessing hybrid computers. And recently, the team of StarPU in Bordeaux have written OpenCL driver for their software, which means that if you write an OpenCL program, it can be sent to StarPU through OpenCL. So, to my opinion, OpenCL is becoming a standard, and it is more and more interesting. Okay. I give you a few words on OpenCL, and now I explain how we will implement the previous very simple algorithm on our GPU. So we organize the data in an XY grid, and for each time step, we associate a work item. So I recall that a work item is a virtual processor. So you don't have to manage the actual processor. You can reserve as many processors as you want, and the actual processors are managed by OpenCL. So we associate a processor to each cell of the grid, and a work group, so a compute unit, a virtual compute unit, to each row of the grid. Then we can compute the flux balance in the x direction for each cell and each row of the grid. And because we have our data are aligned in memory, because we have put the data in a matrix in the memory, the computation of the flux balance in the x direction is perfectly organized, and you have optimal access to the memory. Then we have to transpose the grid. So we exchange this. It's simply a matrix transposition. We exchange the x and the y direction. And then we compute again the flux in the y direction, and we can use the same algorithm because we have exchanged x and y. So it's very simple. And the main point for performance is here in the transposition, because when your data are aligned into the memory, so I have a grid here. When the data are aligned in this direction, if one processor accesses this data in the memory, the next processor will access the next location in memory, and thus the access are very fast. But if you want to compute the flux direction, the flux balance in the y direction, then you have to access data for two successive processors that are on different rows of the matrix. And then you have a jump in memory for the memory access, and this is very slow. You lose a factor of 10 in the memory access if you do this. So you have to perform an optimized transposition algorithm if you want to be efficient. So this is explained here, that we have to use an optimized memory transfer algorithm. And then we transpose again the grid, and we can recommence, as would say Bruno Després. Then you can add an additional parallelism in this approach, which is to split the grid in several slices here. And you can give each slice to one GPU, and you can exchange data between GPUs thanks to MPI. So the message passing interface that you all know, that permits to to perform communication between two processors. So you can extend the parallelism by the MPI, and then you compare all the successive implementation of the very simple algorithm. So what you get is that with the naive code, remember that you have a speedup of 1. With the OpenMP implementation, you have again a factor of 100. And then if you perform an OpenCL optimized algorithm, if you on a K20 GPU, then you have this tremendous speedup of 2000 compared to the initial program. And what is interesting with the OpenCL is that you can also run the same program on a classical CPU with 12 cores, and you also have an interesting speedup. So it means that even if you don't have a GPU, it's interesting to use OpenCL, and you have a performance that are comparable to OpenMP here. Then this is with another GPU, just to show that we indeed are able to run the same program with GPU of different brands. Okay, and if you add the MPI parallelism, then here what you get. So it's very high speedup compared to the initial code. So what is essential here is that in OpenCL you have to avoid tests, because remember that in a compute unit you have several processors, and all the processors will do the same operation at the same time. So if you have tests, all the processor will go into all the branches, into all the test branches. So it's very important to avoid tests in OpenCL. And another point that is very important is that if you don't perform the optimized transposition in memory, then you will lose a factor of 10. So instead of a speed of, you can remove the 0 here at the end. So the memory access are the limiting factor, because you have thousands of processors, so the computation costs nothing. So it is very important to optimize the data arrangement into the memory if you want to be fast. Okay. So partial conclusion, so we have here this conclusion. GPU computing can be really faster than classical computing, but you have constraints and the programming is not very easy. For instance, you have to avoid tests. And the essential point is here, is that because the computation costs nothing, the essential point is to optimize the memory access. So I will give you an example of an interesting computation that has been performed by Jonathan Young, here, the chairman. I am not connected to internet, sorry. I hope. So it's a break in the talk. So you will see here a computation of a bubble collapse. So here you have this is a fluid mechanical problem where you have a bubble of gas, and on this bubble of gas, a shock wave is coming that will shrink the bubble and split it into several parts. So what is represented here is the density of the fluid. So it's this color that I cannot, I don't remember the name in English, but this is a gas. And here you have in red the liquid, high density. And what is nice with GPU is that because the data are into the graphic card, it is possible to display it as the computation run. So here what you see is a screen capture of an actual computation where the computation is going as the display is doing at the same time. So here in this example, the graphic card is computing, displaying the data, and also capturing itself for doing the video. So you can see that it's rather fast. It's on, I don't remember exactly, but here you have a few hundreds of cells in this direction, and here a few hundreds of cells in this direction. Okay? So it works, and it's fast. Here, I would say that the speed up compared to a classical CPU computation is of the order of 100. So the bulk split and so on. Okay, so this is on only one GPU. And Jonathan has also performed the same computation with the MPI implementation. So on a huge grid of 40,000 times 20,000 grid, so it's 4 billion of unknowns for each time step. And the computation has been made on a 10 NVIDIA K20 GPU, and the computation lasted 30 hours. So here you have a view of the split of the time at which the bubble splits. And because the mesh is very fine, you can zoom on the bubble split. So here you have a very nice, very well-resolved shock wave that is starting at the split region. And you have small vortices here that are catched by the scheme. And you can zoom again on the upper and lower part of the bubble split. So here you see that you have very complicated structure that you would not see on a coarser mesh, on coarse mesh. And the same program has been adapted by Michel Massaro, who was here last week, for MHD. So here in MHD, the conservative variable vector is here. So you have the density, momentum, magnetic field, energy, and you can compute with the same kind of algorithm standard test case such as the Orsac-Tank vortex. So here you have an example of what you obtain. This is the density, I think, for this test case, and we have been able to use grids, very fine grids also. Okay. So this was a very simple scheme for solving conservation laws, but now you have limitation, of course, because we only presented the computation on a Cartesian grid. Now we would like to extend, and this is a part of the project that we are doing here at the SEMRAX, is to use a more versatile approach, mainly for geometrical reasons, because we want to use for instance, to mesh a tokamak, so you need to have curved grid. And a very nice method for doing this is a discontinuous Galerkin method. And I will give you now some. I will now give some comment of how to implement efficiently the discontinuous Galerkin method. So the discontinuous Galerkin method is a generalization of the finite volume method. And here I present it in a 3D space. So X here is small x, y, and z. And we consider a mesh of the computational domain. So think about a tokamak, for instance. And you have cells in the mesh. And for me, the generic cell is called L. So I will do a small drawing. So imagine that you have now a curved mesh of your computational domain, etc. And what I call L is a mesh. And generally, the neighbor cells for me are called R, because you are here, you are left, and here you are right. And I consider on the boundary of L a normal vector n that is oriented from left to right. Okay? So L is a cell. So it can be an hexahedron, a pyramid, or what you want. The neighbor cell, the generic neighbor cell, is called R. And here you have the normal vector from left to right. Okay, so in each cell, I consider a basis function that I call phi j for the cell L, and I expand my unknown on this basis. Remember that you have a sum on repeated indices. And because I am lazy, I have not distinguished because the approximation W, I have not distinguished between W and its approximation. So up, no problem for me, I write this. And then the numerical solution of the scheme satisfies the DG approximation scheme that is written here. So we impose that for each cell L and for each basis index I, this weak formulation is satisfied. So what you have in this weak formulation here, you recognize an integration on the boundary of the cell. And because here there is no reason that you have a continuity between two cells, you need to introduce a numerical flux because on the boundary you have a jump a priori between what is in the cell L and the cell R. So you use a numerical flux, like in the finite volume method, see, it's the same. And because here you don't have constant, so this is not piecewise constant function here, you have to take into account the derivatives of this function, and that's why you have this term here that comes from the integration by part in the conservation laws. So if you remove this term here, so if you suppose that the gradient of phi is 0, you recover exactly a finite volume scheme. So here I recall the notation. You have the numerical flux. Generally, the numerical flux has to be consistent with the true flux. So you have that. You need that numerical flux of W is equal to the actual flux of W. And once you have expanded this formula, once you have introducing this into the DG scheme, you get, in the end, you end up with a time integration of a system of ordinary differential equations. And you have to invert here a mass matrix here, Mij of L, which is given by this. And what is very interesting is that in the discontinuous Galerkin method, the mass matrix is easy to invert because it's a block diagonal matrix. Each block is associated to one element. And you can go even further because here, with a good choice of numerical integration, you can have actually a diagonal mass matrix. Oui? This? The flux is linear with respect to the gradient, to this variable here. So you can put it outside. Or, okay. So the flux is simply this. So it's simply, actually it's a notation. You simply have a scalar product between the flux and the normal vector. So you, okay. Alors, the DG method has many advantages. So for instance, you can use varying order because the basis function can change from one element to another. It's very easy to use mesh refinement because you have no, you don't need to match the element. You have a local stencil. The dependence are, you have, of course, you have dependence between two neighbor elements because you need it, because, or it will not be efficient, but you have many local computations that are very efficient on GPU because you can load all the local data into the cache memory, and you have many computations to perform before sending back the data to the global memory. So it's very efficient. That's written here. You can do many optimization for hexahedron mesh. So if you consider curved hexahedrons in 3D, if you align the data inside an hexahedrons with some clever numerical integration, you can be very efficient. And the DG method is also very well adapted to MEMD, SEMD parallelism. So SEMD parallelism is an OpenCL parallelism, where you have many compute units that are sharing the same memory. And this parallelism is the MPI parallelism. So you can use very easily a subdomain decomposition. In each subdomain, you communicate between two subdomains with the MPI library, while all the elementary computations are made with local parallelism, such you can use OpenMP, CUDA, or OpenCL, of course. You have possible issues, which are the memory access, because you use an unstructured mesh. You have to avoid branch tests in kernel, and it can be annoying. For instance, if you have a huge software with many physical models, you have to avoid the kind of test. So, okay, if I am on a boundary of such physical type, I have to use such flux. If I am on this type, I use such flux. So this is very inefficient on GPU. And another problem with this approach that you have to take care of is that when you perform MPI communication between two subdomains, first, if your data are on a GPU, you will have to communicate between the GPU and the host to get the data on the host. And once the data are on the host, you have to exchange with the neighboring subdomain. So you have to take care of this too. So for these reasons, we are developing software that we have called the CLAC. So CLAC means conservation laws approximation on many cores. So it's a C++ library that we developed with a company in Strasbourg. And it is actually used for actual electromagnetic simulation. So this is an industrial software. So you have a research part of the software where we try new algorithms, and you have also a practical part where we are doing actual simulation for antennas, for instance. So this program is made of reasonable C++, because we don't want to do some complicated things. We just want to be able to use the huge libraries that you have around C++. I don't enter into this detail because it's for computer scientists. So we are serious, as you can see, because we use versioning. We are trying to update the documentation we are trying to keep the documentation up to date. And we use also the power of Boost for unit tests and for graphs. So how can we do a good and efficient, maybe it is not the most efficient, but what we have done for being efficient is the following approach. So we first use a subdomain decomposition. So our mesh is split into several domains, and each domain will be associated to an MPI node. And then, it's a rule in CLAC, each MPI node is associated to one accelerator, which is an OpenCL device. So the accelerator can be either a CPU or a GPU. So this is the first decomposition. This is a MPI decomposition. We split the computational domain into several subdomains. Then we do another decomposition, which is the zone decomposition. So each subdomain now is split into several zones. And this notion is very important for performance because a zone is a group of discontinuous Galerkin elements that possess exactly the same characteristics. So you need to have the same order of approximation, the same geometry, and the same physical model. So in this way, we are able to construct for each zone a specialized kernel. So in each zone, we construct a C program where you have no test, because everything is, we keep only the branch that will be used in the zone. So you have no more test in the kernel. We also allow simple non-conformity between zones. So it is possible, for instance, to have an hexahedron with a given refinement that touch an hexahedron with that is refined. So we are able to do a non-conformity. And the geometry and the interpolation are separated. So what does it mean? It means that you can use a coarse mesh, a coarse curved mesh. And this coarse curved mesh is refined into subcells that allows to access the geometry by computations. So when you want to know the position of a node in the mesh, you read a few data into global memory that you load into the cache memory, and then all the geometry is computed. So remember that in the GPU that it is very important to avoid memory access. So we prefer to recompute the geometry rather than loading it into memory. Okay, so this is the philosophy that we have employed. And I just want to mention here that for this reason here with the zone approach, we have to compile a kernel for each zone. So a computation zone is associated to one kernel that is compiled at execution. So when you run your program, the first pass is to compile the zone kernels before launching the computation. So here you have an example. So here you have a domain that is made of two subdomains, so the upper subdomain and the lower subdomain. And you have three volume zones, so you have one zone in the first subdomain here. You have two zones, two volume zones in the lower subdomains. And you also have surface zone where you will that allows to exchange flux between the boundary zones. So you have a surface zone, so 1, 2, 3 surface zone. And you can see here that you have also refinement. So here you have a coarse zone, and here you have a refined zone. Okay. Then there are other several tricks. So for the numerical integration, you use Gauss-Legendre integration for the moment. So we approximate integral by numerical integration. And a nice trick that has been proposed by Estevan is to use basis functions that are associated to the value of the unknowns at the Gauss point. So it allows to avoid many computations. So you have a complexity instead of a d plus 1 to the power 3 complexity, where d is the degree of the polynomial, you have a much lower complexity. And with in this SEMRAC session, we are extending the approach to Gauss-Lobato points and with other optimization. So remember, I recall here that a single kernel well, you have several tricks here that I don't want to discuss too much, but every time we try to avoid memory access to the global memory. So sometimes it's more interesting to keep data into the cache memory and having some processors that are idling. So they are waiting for other processors, and it's more efficient than sending the data to the global memory and getting them back. So you have several optimizations. So I already said that a customized kernel are assembled and compiled for each zone. We also have a task graph. So if you have a complicated mesh, it's very difficult to know what computation has to be done before other computation, and it's very difficult to manage an asynchronous computation. So we have decided to use Boost Graph for managing our graph, and we also use OpenCL to describe the graph, and we hope that the OpenCL drivers are okay and efficient for managing the graph. So here you have an example of task graph. So you have the beginning of the time step, and then each node of the graph corresponds to a kernel that you will launch. For instance, you have kernels that extract data from the volume to the surface zone. you have kernels that compute the fluxes inside the volume, and you have kernels that finish the computation. Because when you launch the communication between two volumes in order to get the boundary data, and once those communications are occurring, you can perform volume computations. So the two are occurring at the same time. And when the transfers are finished, then we finish the flux computation on the boundary of the subdomain. So you need, for managing this, you need a task graph, or it becomes too much complicated. Then you have practical problems that are related to the MPI and OpenCL events management. Because when you launch a kernel into OpenCL, OpenCL is able to say, okay, this kernel is finished, so you can launch another one. But you have to establish a communication between MPI and OpenCL. So it's not, we have not found other solutions than this one, which is to, where is it written? Well, yes, we decided to launch the MPI communication into threads. So it's very strange. But the idea is that you launch a thread. In this thread, you launch the MPI communication. So the main flow of the program can go on because it's sent into a thread. And at the end of the communication, you update an OpenCL event that will trigger other computation. But this approach allows to describe completely the main flow, and communication are performed into threads. Okay, so it's technical point, but we have not found other solutions than doing this if we want to perform fully asynchronous computations. And in the end, we are very happy because recently we have performed efficiency test with Thomas Strub in Accessim. And what we get is that on 4 NVIDIA GPU cards inside one computer, if you perform the computation in the synchronous mode, so it means that we perform the volume computations, we wait that they are finished, then we send the MPI communication, we wait they are finished, and then we go back. We have a speed up with 4 cards of 2.6 compared to the 1 GPU computations. And with our asynchronous graph task and implementation, we were very happy 3 weeks ago because we get optimal speed up, more than optimal speed up. And we have not understood why it is higher than 4 in this case. Okay, so with this software, we are able to do actual computation. So here you have the example of the resolution of Maxwell equation outside an aircraft with an interesting, so it's very huge computation with 3 million of hexahedrons of high order, which means that you have more than 1 billion of unknowns for each time step. You have also PML lawyer for those who knows this. We are able to launch a computation on several GPUs. Okay, so it works. So here you have the current on the skin of the aircraft. We have also computation of waveguide filter that compare well to other software. So here I will try to zoom to show you that the mesh is not, you see that is a little bit curved here, so it's not a regular mesh, fully regular mesh. And I think that I am at the conclusion. So this is the results in the waveguide filter. Okay, so this is the end of the talk. So finally, CLAC is an asynchronous hybrid DG solver based on OpenCL and MPI. It works already, and we have work in progress in the context of the same rack. So we are introducing a Gauss-Lobato integration point into the software. We are optimizing the memory transfer on hexahedrons. And we also include the Vlasov model into this software. And in a further objective, we would like to optimize the management of the task graph in order to be more efficient on hybrid computers. So if you have a computer with several standard CPUs and one GPU, for instance, it's not easy to distribute the computation on this kind of architecture. And we have some ongoing work on this kind of problem. Okay, thank you for your attention.